So welcome everyone once again. As you can see, this is the part 3 of the 50 Shades of New Normal. We've already done 44 of the shades. Okay, sorry, 45 of them already, or 44. And we are going to do the last 6 today. So essentially, part 1 of this series covered 35 shades of the political and social alternate reality that we find ourselves in, not only directly due to the pandemic, such as flattening the curve and shutdowns and so on, but also other things that got supercharged during the pandemic, such as the cancel culture, Black Lives Matter, all sorts of defund the police, all of these things that were also supercharged. Then part 2 covered the area of crazynomics, showing that today's macroeconomic world cannot be understood by traditional means. And we looked at some things such as why stock markets were booming when there was a recession and so on. In fact, one day after my seminar last week, the stock markets collapsed. Okay, so I don't know if they were listening to my seminar, but today we've had the surprising thing of all the tech stocks that were driving the stock market up, all have gone into recession, America, Australia, all over. So we have had a situation where, in fact, the recession is being shown out in the stock markets. This part 3 is to look at global interconnections. Okay, so we're going to look at 6 further shades, essentially from global logistical supply chain, which is the interconnection between the supply chains in different countries, as well as the weather patterns, both the physical weather patterns as well as ocean currents that drive our climate. So we're going to look at these two. In fact, we will show that these are heavily interconnected. Okay, so first of all, there was a book some years ago from a person called Thomas Friedman, who said that the world is flat. Right. Now, this is the same author that I referred to in part 1 of my talk when he gave us the Lexus and the Olive Branch book, which talked about globalization, bringing in world peace. And therefore, we talked about McDonald's and his Golden Arches theory. Here is a book that came out later that he said that the world is flat. Now, what he meant was that essentially, that it's a level playing field. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, doesn't matter if you're in India, China, USA, all competitors have equal opportunity because of the speed and technology that we have, okay? But it's a level playing field and it's equal opportunity, but today this very flatness that we have seen, this level playing field, in fact, has enabled the pandemic to spread at warp speed from China to every corner of the world, okay? I mean, the first cases were in China, and simple travel from there to various parts of the world has made the pandemic spread at such a speed. And that is, again, caused by this concept of the world being flat. So we are going to see if the world remains to be flat now in terms of supply chains. Okay, so that was the way it spread. Okay, so in the book by Friedman, he talks about 10 flatteners that Friedman saw as leveling the global playing field. 3 of them will require reimagining post-COVID-19. These are outsourcing, where service and manufacturing activities are split into components that can be subcontracted and performed in the most efficient and cost-effective manner. Okay, so we can give it to countries that have certain economies of scale and other economies. They can do it much more efficiently and more cost effectively than we can. Of course, the early country to take advantage of this was the cheap labor in China. Then offshoring was another concept that Friedman saw as being flatteners, where company manufacturing or other processes are relocated to a foreign land to take advantage of less costly operations. So the subcontracting along with offshoring, taking opportunities elsewhere, was also seen as a flattener. And the third one that needs reimagining after COVID-19 is supply chaining, where technology is used to streamline sales, distribution and shipping into a seamless supply chain, much like how a river delivers water. It's a seamless delivery of the supply chain. Now, all these three things actually work together, as you can see, because you need to do proper supply chaining, to do outsourcing, and the cost is important for offshoring. But these three were seen as being one of the reasons why the world was considered by Friedman in terms of supply chain to be flat. He was giving examples of going to India in the middle of the night in terms of India, but working with America and Australia at daytime hours. In other words, the world never slept. Okay, so that's the 45th new normal, that suddenly we've seen that the world cannot be flat anymore. Okay, we have to think about another thing. So one of the things, of course, is our immense need for us to be involved and dependent on China. So can we decouple from China? That has been some new normal thinking that has been going around. When governments finally reacted and closed their borders, it is again this very flatness that resulted in scarcity of essential supplies, as most of these were sourced from China. So the first cases are diagnosed in China. What happened was the Chinese government then had government mandated factory closures in that country, which immediately shut down China's manufacturing base. Okay. Many suppliers temporarily ceased production and logistics. Many suppliers temporarily ceased production, and logistics suppliers struggled with transportation of goods, particularly across borders. As this pandemic spread, the whole world became to realize how dependent the rest of the world had become on China. And what are we dependent on? The most basic of supplies. Even our toilet rolls, to a large extent, was being made in China. And in Australia, as this picture shows you, empty shelves cleaned out of toilet rolls. The most critical of equipment, including medical supplies, were also coming from China. So not only the basics, but also the crucial things are coming from China. Here's a picture of Chinese supplies being given to Australia. And many critical raw materials required in manufacturing, especially rare earth elements, were also coming from China. Okay, so we were really, really dependent on China. Now, the pandemic's disruption to supply chains is producing some significant action by countries. Okay, they want to break that supply chain. The Japanese government recently set aside 2.2 billion to provide incentives for Japanese to reshore and relocate activities from China. So they're saying, Japanese companies will pay you money to go elsewhere. Okay, US has done the same thing. Okay, it has prepared to spend a similar amount to Japan to promote the reshoring of manufacturing activities and jobs from China. And the big beneficiaries would be Vietnam, Taiwan, Mexico, and Europe. However, I think that there's a huge opportunity for a country that has the same size population, that is India. Okay, so that could be a great opportunity for India also to set up its supply chains. Now, most Western economies, including Australia, are contemplating creating domestic manufacturing of products such as product previously sourced from China. So Australia has realized, my God, you know, we can't have this happening again where we run out of toilet rolls or other essential goods. Okay, we need to have domestic manufacturing. Okay, essential goods, personal protection equipment, medical technology, and pharmaceuticals. Now, the whole problem with the old world is flat concept, where you take it to the most efficient place elsewhere or relocate, is that the skill that is required in the country is lost forever. That very skill goes out, okay, and then to get it back again, even simple things like manufacturing of essential items, we don't have the skill anymore in a country that is outsourced. So that is important, and I believe that countries, especially developed countries like Australia, USA, and so on, should pay money to manufacturers to keep their employees having the skill sets, keep the employees having the skill set. Okay, even if it's going to mean subsidizing some of their wages because they can't compete with the low wages of other countries. So that is important to keep the skill set of these essential things within the country. Okay, so can we actually decouple from China? It's not going to be easy. We cannot decouple not only from America, but the rest of the Western world. Okay, Trump is trying hard, but it's not going to be easy. There will be enormous costs and dislocations of companies to disengage from China. It's not a merely matter of stopping the order here and then setting up another company with the order. Remember that many of these companies have built long-term lasting relationship with their Chinese suppliers. In fact, many Australian companies, when China could not supply, okay, because of their lasting relationship with those suppliers, they were the first to get their orders when China was able to produce. So these relationships cannot be easily decoupled. Okay, there's a lot of goodwill, there's a lot of understanding, okay, between these countries of what is required, what are the quality requirements, all of that. There's a huge understanding that cannot be easily decoupled. And also remember that China today is a big market. So if you decouple from China, then you're losing billions of people, 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion people who are your potential market for the Western countries. So this is also something that Western companies cannot ignore. However, there's no question that something will happen. The world will no longer be flat anymore. There will be some, but not total decoupling from China. Other countries will take over. At least people will think about alternate sources of supply. Okay, that is going to happen. Okay, the world, there will be trading bubbles, there will be travel bubbles. All of these might happen. Okay, because we cannot think of the whole world as being seamless supply chain. Okay, now we have this issue of just in time versus just in case. Now, in the wake of the virus-induced supply chain disruptions, some experts have been quick to blame just-in-time manufacturing, citing modern manufacturing obsession with lean supply chains as the culprit. So essentially, for those who are uninitiated, just-in-time means when you are having the production taking place, the material is supplied to you. It is only supplied to you if there is a customer order. Okay, so often even big companies that in Australia, such as General Motors and Holden in the old days, okay, had about 14 minutes of component supplies with them because they were constantly being given the supplies as and when manufacturing was taking place. There was no concept of keeping inventory or stock. So they said that the fact that companies have gone into this lean manufacturing to cut costs and other things, when the suppliers couldn't supply, they couldn't manufacture themselves. So manufacturers around the world relying on JIT supplies for their basic components of production could not manufacture as basic supplies dried up. Okay, so those factories went silent. Supply shocks like pandemics highlight how interconnected the supply chain structure is. A company's supply might not be in an affected area, but if there are raw materials in an affected region, then you will be affected too. So you might be free or you might get over the COVID lockdowns quickly, but if your raw material guys are in shutdown, then you have a problem. Now, going back to JIT and the criticisms of JIT, it must be remembered that JIT is what we call a pull manufacturing system, where manufacturing starts only when an order is received. So you can think about a McDonald's. Okay, you go and order a cheeseburger. It's only when you order the cheeseburger do they start making it. They don't have a stock of cheeseburgers ready for you to give you when you come into the shop. You might be having a few cheeseburgers like buffer stock, but the thing about JIT is manufacturing only starts when an order is received. So no pull system can produce for a future event. If you're producing for a future event, that means you're doing a push system. You're creating inventory. Okay, so you can't blame JIT, okay, because JIT cannot predict a future event like a pandemic. Okay, Further, one of the key reasons to implement JIT philosophy is to reduce inventory, ideally to zero, as inventory has significant holding costs, especially the financing cost of holding inventory. Okay, holding inventory, large warehouses, stock people, forklift trucks, all of this costs a lot of money, including the purchase cost of the raw materials that went into that inventory. But today, we have had a COVID-related situation where inventory costs actually could be significantly reduced because the interest rates are so low. Okay, as I told you in my last seminar, interest rates are effectively zero and in some cases have gone negative. So if that is the case, then a very large component of inventory holding costs could be eliminated, giving the possibility of holding stocks without that much of cost being involved. Okay. Companies that were holding supply inventories as consignment stocks were in their own warehouses were caught less off guard by supply chain disruptions and could continue operations under JIT conditions until replacements arrived. Okay, so very often those who are saying they are under JIT were having supplier stock in their factory. So it didn't belong to them, it is consignment stock, and they had it because of possibilities of traffic jams and other things, not enabling a free flow of goods. So these people were still able to do something when the pandemic hit. So essentially, think about this consignment stock issue, where the supplier stock is kept in your warehouses, so it doesn't cost you anything. Okay, supplier pays for everything. Okay, and then you can draw on it if there is a major disruption. Okay, the 48th shade is the amazing thing that oil prices went negative and in fact still are extremely low. The investing world was gobsmacked when oil futures went negative in April 2020. The new normal of restricted air travel, city lockdowns, and work from home culture, which we've talked about before, created a drop in demand for crude oil that storage capacity around the world started filling up fast. In fact, there were lots and lots of super tankers that were simply roaming the seas. Okay, they were simply storage bins out in the ocean. They couldn't deliver it to the refineries. Okay. Offshore tanks in most parts of the US were at capacity. The rest of the world was not far behind. If refineries ultimately do not want your oil, it has little value. If a supplier has crude oil and nowhere to put it, it can have a negative value. This is what happened in April. So they said, please take our oil. We will pay you if you take our oil because we have nowhere to put it. Okay. So this time in the latest financials that have come out, major oil companies are reporting massive losses. Okay. Chevron, for example, biggest loss ever. It's not only oil companies, but all businesses that are at the heart of the fossil fuel economy. Oil and gas firms, steel producers, car makers, airlines are already going through the agony of shrinking their long-term capacity and employment. In Australia, one airline was put up for sale, Virgin, but even Qantas, okay, huge losses, and they're shedding the thousands and thousands of staff. Okay, so they are going through major structural changes. Such upheaval, as painful as it is for those affected, is tailor-made for investment in climate-friendly infrastructure that boosts growth and creates jobs. So if you have a problem with jobs and growth in the fossil fuel sector, it is an opportunity for us to take those jobs into a new sector, okay? That is climate-friendly infrastructure, such as renewables and so on, okay? Low interest rates make the bill smaller than ever. Over the past decade, costs of wind and solar have tumbled, but not enough to shift consumers away from fossil fuels. But now it has happened. Forced, no doubt, but it has happened. So we can invest in more and more wind farms. It is becoming cost effective because the oil price is so low. and therefore the solar prices can match it. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the market sentiments. Today, both businesses and individuals are actively seeking energy alternatives. This demand is in such large number that it's making worthwhile in investing in infrastructure to deliver such energy. Okay, so people are turning to these alternatives. There's a lot of young people, much more socially conscious than the older generation, who are saying, look, we've got to think about us and our children, okay? And therefore, they are, no matter what the cost is, maybe a little higher, we will turn into alternatives, okay? So there is one thing that is now becoming cost effective to go into these renewable energy sources, wind, solar, and so on, geothermal, all of these areas. Here's a little cartoon. Sorry, look on the bright side, at least they're using renewable energy, okay, the sun in this case, which is the big issue in the solar. Okay, so that is the supply logistics, man-made logistical supply chains. But what about the physical supply chains? Let's look at weather patterns. And the big one, of course, is climate change. Even before COVID-19, this was the doomsday scenario, okay? And we've had Greta Thunberg and so on coming up and saying, basically, you can't do business on a dead planet. So this doomsday scenario is still there. We haven't been able to avoid it, okay? COVID-19 has only slightly dented it, okay? The COVID-19 pandemic and global warming due to greenhouse gases are very similar. Both do not care much of borders, making both menaces global. And both demand government action on a scale hardly ever seen in peacetime. Okay, you can see that governments, we talked about it last time, was having huge amounts of quantitative easing, money printing, and trying to save jobs, trying to pump money into the economy to get the economy going, and still it's happening. So that sort of action we still need governments to do in the climate change area. Both crises are not only similar in impact, but they also interact. Locking down the economy had led to massive cuts in greenhouse gas emissions in most big cities around the world. COVID-19 has resulted in the biggest carbon crash ever recorded, obviously due to the abandonment of planes, trains, and automobiles, and our work from home culture. So it is the biggest carbon crash ever. Okay, let's see what we've had. Now, the reason for all of this, okay, the physical logistics weather patterns, is the North Atlantic current. Okay, now the North Atlantic current essentially takes salt water, okay, and it becomes fresh water, a cool subsurface flow and the warm surface flow, and we have this current. Now this current is not only in the ocean, but these very currents drive our weather patterns. Our clouds and all of that is driven by the North Atlantic current. Okay, so when, of course, what's happening with climate change is that if the global warming and the trapping of carbon dioxide and methane gases is going to trap the atmosphere and starts getting warmer, Greenland up here can start melting. Too much of fresh water can come into the North Atlantic, and this technically could stop. Now, even before the North Atlantic current stops because of the too much of fresh water, we are seeing even 1/3 of this block of ice, okay, could cause massive flooding. As you know, Miami is already in many streets underwater. Venice, St. Marcos Square underwater. New York, where we had the September 11 monument, goes often underwater. So the global water levels are rising, okay? And that is all to do with the global warming issues that we have to tackle. So we are not tackling this, unfortunately. As you can see, the biggest carbon crash, okay, has crashed in 2020 from the way it was going. Okay, you can see, this is called the hockey stick effect. Looks like a hockey stick. But that crash, is it enough? Is it enough? That is the forecast. Is it enough? Looks what's happened. California, before and after, full shutdown, significant changes in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Europe, before and after, okay, 1 year before and the same time 1 year later, you can see huge reductions. China, big one, okay, huge reductions during the time that they were under lockdown. In fact, you have interesting things like I think this is called the India Gate in Delhi. This is what it looked like before India shut down, and that is what it looks like after the shutdown. Of course, when India opens up again, we go back to this old smog-related area in Delhi. As you know, the Sri Lankan cricket team got sick in Delhi on simply breathing the normal air. Okay, so of course the CO2 reductions are not the same in every country. In New York, significantly, it was down by only 10%, while in Paris, a massive 72%. So you can see, okay, remember that Americans is give me liberty or give me death. So they will go out and not wear masks, and apparently this huge motorcycle rally that they had with some 300,000 people without wearing masks has now resulted in a super spreader of the virus. Okay, so different countries reacted differently. So my point is that there was a big carbon crash, but is it enough? Even though we see a massive fall this year, the concentration of CO2 that in the atmosphere and warming our planet will not stabilize until the world reaches what we call net zero. Net zero carbon. Okay, no more increases. I think we will allow only about 1.5 to 2 degree increase. This is unfortunately the inconvenient truth about the climate crisis. It is much too large to be solved by just the abandonment of planes, trains, and automobiles. Much too large an issue. Even if people endure huge changes in how they lead their lives, as we are doing now, okay, the sad experiment with COVID-19 has shown that the world would still have more than 90% of the necessary decarbonization left to do. We need to do that to get back on the Paris Agreement's most ambitious goal of a climate of only 1.5 degrees warmer than it was before the Industrial Revolution. Not too sure if we can make it, but there are people who are saying, no, we have to give a chance to the Paris Accord, except that Donald Trump has walked away from it. Okay, first thing he did was walk away from it. So let's hope that if we get a new president, they will come back. But remember, although Trump walked away because of the way the agreements are signed, they haven't actually left the Paris Accord yet. Okay, but they've told that they are leaving. Now, I don't know if any new president comes, if the Paris Accord will take them in, but I hope for the rest of the world, there is a new president and the Paris Accord accepts America back again. Now, there's one glimmer of hope in all this, with COVID-19, one glimmer of hope. While the pandemic reveals the size of the climate challenge ahead, it also creates a unique opportunity. It gives a politically acceptable chance to enact government policies that steer the economy away from carbon at a lower financial, social, and political cost that might otherwise have been the case. That's the big problem. Okay, if you put a thing like a carbon tax, the people don't want to pay a higher price. They don't want to have the impact on their hip pocket today. They can't think about the future. But with the oil prices so low, it may be possible to introduce a carbon tax, because ultimately the current oil price plus the carbon tax may have no difference in what we are paying for our petrol and gas at the gas station. Okay, so it will appear seamless to consumers. There will be less of a social and political impact, but it has to be done now. Okay, we can't wait until the oil prices go up and people start going in the cars again. We can't be doing that. Okay, so such a tax will also enable the renewable energies to remain price competitive to a cheap oil, to be a higher oil then. Also, the revenue from a carbon tax over the next decade can help repair battered government finances due to the pandemic. So every country has been doing quantitative easing, giving money out, okay? We need to collect some money in form of some sort of taxes. Now, even Australia today they're talking about lowering the taxes because they want people to have more money to spend and get the economy going. But remember, lowering the taxes means it's going to take longer and longer to pay the bills of the debt that they've taken, unless there are other means of taxation, and a carbon tax would be ideal. And the time to do it is now. Okay, the last of the 50 shades is plastic pollution. Pity the oceans. During the COVID-19 pandemic, consumption of single-use plastic grown by 250 to 300% since the virus took hold. Much of that increase is down to demand for products designed to keep COVID-19 at bay, such as masks, visors, and gloves. The global disposable mask market grew from an estimated 800 million in 2019 to 166 billion in 2020. Included on that is throwaway containers, because we all were at home, we had to order food from outside, and they all came in plastic containers. Now, where do all these things go? Lockdowns have also led to a boom in e-commerce. Much of what is bought online is often packaged in plastic comprising of several layers. We might buy a non-plastic item, but it's all packed in plastic. Okay? While this keeps the contents safe in airplane aisles and on delivery lorries, it also makes it nearly impossible to recycle this plastic. Much of the plastic produced ends up either in landfill sites or make their way into the oceans. Okay? So many developing countries, they're beautiful oceans. Indonesia is one example of this, littered with this trash. Okay, and that's what happens. So here are the oceans. Okay, this is called Trash Island. There are many trash islands, not only one. An entire island size thing of trash that the ocean currents have brought together. This one is near Hawaii. Okay, in fact, so much so that some people have wanted to make this a sovereign nation and asked the United Nations to recognize this as a sovereign nation called Trash Island. And also they have issued their own currency. Not sure if it is going to be valid, but perhaps as useful as US dollar in the future. But this is what is happening. Look at the size. This is happening around the world. Okay, total plastic trash. In addition to the public's increasing appetite for single-use plastic, there also appears a diminishing inclination to recycle, even material that can be reused. Okay, we don't simply want to separate out our items. An unwillingness to recycle might be explained by people's nervousness about venturing out to put waste in recycling bins. Okay, they don't want to go out. Or it might be that the lockdowns have put more pressing matters in their minds. I mean, if you are thinking about what to eat and how to stay safe, recycling may not be foremost in your mind. Okay, also, many of the recycling places are closed. COVID-19 has led to a glut of plastic waste in other ways. Because petroleum, a major constituent of most plastics, the crash in the oil price means that they have become cheaper to produce. So rather than recycling the plastic, they can get the cheap oil and make the plastic. Okay, so that has also increased the plastic pandemic. That in turn gives firms less incentive to use recycled stuff. Now let's talk about recycling. For me to finish off, I believe it's a big con, the recycling. What is the history about recycling? What happened in the 1970s was that the plastic and chemicals industry realized that if governments made them responsible for bearing the cost of recycling, it would make their product uneconomical. If the government said, you guys that are making plastic, make sure you get rid of it as well, they said it would be make it uneconomical. So what did they do? Brilliant. They fear the backlash caused by the inevitable plastic pollution of the water, which is now happening, because landfills, especially in poor countries, are often little more than open dumps. They're responsible for some of the biggest leakage of plastic into the oceans, as I've shown you, because the material is light, easily swept away by rain or wind into the waterways. So they realized that there was going to be this inevitable plastic pollution and that they are going to be blamed for it, and they would have to take the responsibility for, cleaning it up. So what did they do? They actually put a fantastic advertising program by saying, all of you guys who are using the plastic, that's the customer, consumer, you should become good citizens and recycle the plastic. You should be recycling the plastic, okay? Separating out the plastic and doing all that. So they came up with a fantastic logo saying that you can return the item back, okay? Recycle, be good citizens, okay? They had lots and lots of different logos for different types of things that you can recycle. Very, very confusing. Okay, but one thing that they don't tell us is much of the plastic that we take trouble to recycle will end up in landfills or be incinerated. In fact, only 10% of the plastic that we are recycling, okay, a plastic waste can be commercially recycled. I mean, you can recycle with this logo. It means you can recycle it. You can recycle it in a laboratory, okay, not commercially, okay. So this is what we think is happening to the plastic that we recycle. That is the perception. Lots of places where it is all separated out and put into all these areas, and they're getting these sorts of plastics made back again into plastic that we can remold. But this is the reality. Huge dumps, okay, most of them in developing countries where they're going into the waterways ultimately. And in fact, they're incinerated. Okay, now in China, who was taking a lot of this plastic because they wanted more and more plastic for their manufacturing, now has stopped it because a lot of it they realized they can't use. And incineration has made some of the children in those areas sick and so on. So this is what we have to do something about this. We can't, just think we are separating out our plastics. We have to actually stop using plastic, full stop. So recycling versus plastic free. This is a company I mentioned to you last time, okay, where the actual product itself is in recycled paper, okay, and their wrapping and the entire packaging is also plastic free, okay. So that's what we have to do. It's not merely recycling, but we really have to go plastic free. And I think individual consumers haven't got the power. We have to really get governments to work and get big supermarkets and all to refuse to take anything that is wrapped in plastic that cannot be properly commercially recycled. So we need some new logos, okay? Now, when I looked at logos without plastic, there are hundreds of them, some of them licensed, in fact. I don't think a logo should be licensed, okay? Where they have the word no plastic. So this will be meaningless to someone who is in a country that doesn't talk in the English language, but we have to get a logo that clearly says we are not going to use any plastic, okay? Something that is easily recognizable as saying there's no plastic in this product, full stop. Okay, in summary, part one of this series covers the political and social alternate reality that the world finds itself in. In part two, it has shown that the traditional macroeconomic policies that worked in previous crises could no longer be relied upon, and we talked about crazynomics. And this concluding part three, the impact of supply chains and weather patterns and climate change was discussed. Now, why are we doing all this? I go back to my first lecture, for my first topic. We need to, as people in companies, we must look, after you understand the 50 shades of the new normal, look at what are opportunities, what are threats because of this, what are strengths, what are weaknesses, okay? And we should then look at things like ANSOS matrix to look at where do we go from our existing markets and existing products, what are the new markets that are possible, what are the new products that are possible. Okay, if you are in the travel agency, I mentioned this last time, transporting humans? What about transporting cargo, which has no COVID-19? Or do we diversify and go into something completely different? So this is why it's important for us to look at and understand the 50 shades of the new normal. Okay, now to finish up, I want to show you a very quick video.
We fell asleep in one world and woke up in another. Suddenly Disney is out of magic. Paris is no longer romantic. New York doesn't stand up anymore. The Chinese wall is no longer a fortress. And Mecca is empty. Hugs and kisses suddenly become weapons, and not visiting parents and friends becomes an act of love. Suddenly you realize that power, beauty, and money are worthless and can't get you the oxygen you're fighting for. The world continues its life, and it is beautiful. It only puts humans in cages. I think it's sending us a message. You are not necessary. The air, earth, water, and sky, without you are fine. When you come back, remember that you are my guests, not my masters.
Okay, so I hope that video is a very powerful video. Thank you for that.